All right, good morning. A good Erev Shabbos, a good Erev Yontif. Today we're learning Maseches Kiddushin, Daf Mem Zayin. We're starting with the very last two words on Mem Vav Amud Beis. And yesterday we had learned a discussion about a woman who was given multiple dates as her Kiddushin. And we had spoken about a case where she ate them one at a time. And the Gemara opens as follows. Omar Rava, turning to the top of Mem Zayin, Lo Shanu. When we only learned something, we'll see in a moment what that is. Lo shanu ela omar la bizu vizu vizu. Let's take a look at Rashi to help us fill in the gaps. Rashi at the top of the page, Dibra Maseches lo shanu. Lo shanu, we only learned heicha de ochelis rishona rishona, where she ate each date as they were handed to her. De'ein mitzarfos lepruta, that they don't add up. We only say that that's true, that they don't add up, when the framing of the Kiddushin was bizu vizu vizu. So he said, "Hiskachi li b'tamaros b'tamarzu uvizu uvizu uvizu." That was the Kiddushin. That's what the Gemara says. Aval, in contrast, Amar la be'elu. If instead of saying with this date and with this date and with this date, he said with these dates in all-inclusive terminology, then afilu ocheles nami mikudeshes. Then if they're eaten, and then in aggregate they are a kezayis, then ki ka'achla midenafsha ka'achla. Then she's eating, even if what she ate in the moment isn't a kezayis, is shavapruta, but in aggregate it is. She ate the first one, they're married because they're all hers now. Because the way he gave them to her is elu. This basket of dates is yours, and therefore because the basket is shavapruta, the second she takes a bite out of it, done. She's married. And this is the shita of Rava. And Tanya Kavase de Rava. We have a brisa that supports the shita of Rava. Let's take a look at this brisa. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this till we get till about the halfway point in the block. The Gemara says as follows: Tanya Kavase de Rava, 4 lines down, Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. Hiskachili be skip the line. Hiskachili be alone be rimonu ve'egos. If a man says to a woman, "Please marry me with this acorn, with this pomegranate, or with this nut of some kind, cashew, whatever the case may be," odd instruments to get married. The Gemara says, or she'amar la hiskachi li be'elu, or he said that broad phrase, the one that Rava was talking about, where he said, hiskachi li be'elu, marry me with all of these, let's call it a basket of dates under the circumstances. Im yesh bechulan shava pruta, if in aggregate all of the dates are worth a pruta mikudeshes. Ve'im lav, and if not, if the whole basket is not, or the alon rimon and egos, if they're not a shava pruta, then ena mikudeshes. The brisa continues. Bizu vizu vizu. If he said with this date, and that date, if that's what he said, then im yesh bechulan shava pruta. If in total they are a shava pruta mikudeshes, ve'im lav ena mikudeshes. If he said bizu with this date and then nitalto v'achalto and she ate it, bizu with this second date and then nitalto v'achalto and then she ate it, ve'od bizu, and she kept eating them one at a time as he handed them to her. In a case like that, we don't look at it in aggregate. We need one of the tamaros to actually be a shava pruta. This is the brisa that supports the shita of Rava. We can see hints as to how this may reflect the shita of Rava, because Rava, again, at the top line, we can review his shita. Lo shanu, we only said that eating them one at a time is not mitzaref in the case of bizu. That was hinted to in this brisa. But let's analyze this brisa. Anyways, we're 12 lines down or so on Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. Says the Gemara, Hai be'alon be'rimon be'egos. The case of the brisa, which speaks about him saying, "Please marry me with this acorn, with this pomegranate, with this nut." Heichi dami. What is this actual case? Ilema de Amar La. Maybe we'll say that what he's actually saying to her is O be'alon, O be'rimon, O ve'egos, with either of these, this or this or this. Then im yesh bechulan shava pruta mikudeshes. Then why would we look in aggregate im yesh bechulan shava pruta? He said or. The word or as an operator, this or this or this. The aggregate is irrelevant. The aggregate's not helpful. We need one of them to be that way. Oka Amar. So therefore, it can't be that when our brisa, the brisa that starts 4 lines down on this page, when it says that he said, "Please marry me with this alon, rimon, and egos," it can't be that the operator is or this or this or that. The ella, it must be ba'alon uve rimon uve egos. It's and. So it says the Gemara, if that's the case, hainu, that's no different than the case of bizu vizu vizu. It's exactly like the latter case in the brisa, and therefore there's no difference between them. Ella, says the Gemara, lav, it must be the Amar La be'elu. It must be that we're talking about with these, that the case of alon, rimon, and egos is a case of elu. Says the Gemara, that can't be either, because, and we're a third of the way down on Mem Zayin and Aleph, Hamidikatani Seifa, we said later in the Brisa, Osha Amar Lo Iskachi Li Be'elu, Michlal Dereisha La Be'elu Askinan. If you want to say that the Brisa, which is 4 lines down, when it said Iskachi Li Be'alon Be'rimon Uve'egos, was really saying with all of these. Well, the Brisa already spoke about that later, where it says Be'elu. So the Gemara says, let me tell you how to read this Brisa. Perushe Kamefarish. The first 2 cases of the Brisa blend into one another. What does that mean? Says the Gemara as follows, a third of the way down, Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. Really, he started out like this. Hiskachi li be'alon be'rimonu be'egos. A man says, Hariat mekudeshesli, you're going to be married to me with this acorn, with this rimon, and with this, what was the third one? With the cashew, with a nut of some kind. So the Gemara says, Hiskachi li be'alon be'rimonu be'egos. And then, Ketzad, what is an example of this? Then we go into the second case of the Brisa. Kigon to Amar Leiskachi Li Be'elu. And V'katani Seifa, we know this is true because what does the Seifa say? Bizu Natalto Ve'achalto. If he hands her one and says, you're going to be married to me with this, and while he's talking, she eats it, and then Im Yesh Be'achas Min Shavapruta Mekudeshes Rim Lab, Ena Mekudeshes Ve'ilu Reisha. But in the beginning part of the Brisa, the cases of Alon, Rimon, and Egos, and the case of Elu, Lo Kamaflig Ben Ocheles Lemanachas. We don't distinguish between eating and between it resting. Therefore, we see there's a difference between the first 2 cases, which is Alon, Rimon, and Egos, and the case of Elu on the one side, compared to the latter case of where she ate each one at a time. Shmami, no. What do we see from here? Halfway down. That whenever we have a broader language of marry me with all of these, then the second she eats any of it, she's married. Shma mina, that Rava is in fact correct. So let's just pause here to summarize. You can see that Rava today on the very bottom line that we started with at Mem Vav Amud Beis was teaching us a din. That when a husband proposes to a woman, vizu, 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 where he says, marry me with each of these individual things, and she eats them one at a time, there we say, ein mitzdarfos. And he brings a raya from this brisa. And while somewhat complicated, we're able to see from the fact that the reisha, the beginning of the brisa, and the seifa, the end of the brisa, are different. We can see, therefore, that Rava is correct. Now the Gemara asks a question. It's the type of question that we would often see from Tosfos, which is because Tosfos learned a lot of Gemara. The Balei Tosfos knew what they were talking about. So the Gemara is going to say, wait 1 second. We're learning something over here, but it doesn't make sense with something that we learned elsewhere in Shas. Thankfully, the elsewhere in Shas was yesterday's Gemara, so we'll have a little bit of a connection in our memory. Says the Gemara, Hanicha, all of this is fine and good, Leman de Amar Aseifa Koi, according to those who say that the Seifa is what the Mishnah is talking about. What is this a reference to? So yesterday, we learned the Mishnah on Mem Vav Amud Aleph, and we had 3 cases in the Mishnah. The first case of the Mishnah was the case of Hiskachi. The second case of the Mishnah was Bezu, Vizu, Vizu. And the third case of the Mishnah was if she eats these dates as she receives them. So then the Mishnah said over there that Eina Mikudeshes Ashe B'Hachas Men Shava Pruta. We weren't sure if that third case was talking about the Seifa or the Reisha. So the Gemara says, Amar, who's actually Ravami, that he says that it's talking about the Seifa. Umay, what then was the end of our Mishnah on Mem Vav Amud Aleph? Umay ad shehe ba'achas men shava pruta, ad she ba'achrona shava pruta, so that the last one is a shava pruta. Hachanami, here in our brisa over here with the story of Rava that we've been discussing, ad she ba'achrona shava pruta. All of that is fine and good. What's not fine and good, says the Gemara, is Rav and Shmuel's understanding of the Mishnah on Mem Vav. Yesterday we learned that the Rav and Shmuel Damre Tarvaihu, they both say Areisha Kai, that the final case in our Mishnah on Mem Vav Amud Aleph is actually connected to the first case of Hiskachi to the case on Mem Vav Amud Aleph, and Ve'ocheles Yitzrichale, and the Chiddush of that Mishnah, of that limud, the way that we were attaching the last case of the Mishnah to the first case of the Mishnah was to teach us a chiddush about her actually eating the food. So then Hacha over here, klale kachashiv, prate lo kachashiv. Here, this brisa, again, the brisa we've been focusing on all day, the one that's 4 lines down on Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, this brisa should not make sense for Rav and Shmuel because klale kachashiv, we're only speaking in broader terms. We're only talking about language like these 3 things: the alone and the rimon and the egos. But prate lo kachashiv, there is no specific drilled down case of you're married with this individual thing. That should not work for Rav and Shmuel. The Gemara says, don't worry. We could still accept Rav and Shmuel's answer from yesterday's Gemara that the Seifa of the Mishnah on Mem Vav Amud Aleph is connected to the Reisha of the Mishnah on Mem Vav Amud Aleph. Why? Hamani, last short line on Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, Rebbe. Really, our case is talking about the case of Rebbe. Our Mishnah here, the Brisa here on Mem Zayin Amud Aleph is talking about Rebbe. What's Rebbe's shita? To Amar, he was of the opinion that lo shna kizayis. It doesn't matter if he says to her this and this. Well, this is not actually talking about marriage, but we're extrapolating from elsewhere in Shas. This is a Gemara in Shavuos. Velo shna kizayis u kizayis pratahave. If he says bezu uvezu uvezu uvezu, we still view that as similar to giving her only one object to get married with. And because that's true, this brisa is not complicated for Rav and Shmuel's answer that was given in yesterday's Gemara. And the answer that Rav and Shmuel gave yesterday was that the 3rd case in the Mishnah of Mem Vav Amud Aleph is really tethered to the 1st case, and therefore Kaftor Vaferach were able to understand both Rav Ami's answer from yesterday, that was the Pashut one, and as well Rav and Shmuel's answer from yesterday as well. All is well and good. We accept Rava's answer, Rava's starting point of the day today, that Lo Shanu, we only say that eating the kizayis, eating the tomorrows individually are not mitzdaref, where he said bezu uvezu uvezu. But if he said be'elu, once he gave her a whole basket of dates, then the second she takes a bite out of one of them, they are halachically married. That's the end of sugya number 1 for today. Sugya number 2 for today is a Shas sugya. As you will soon see, we're going to be touching various Masechtas in Shas and trying to understand this principle of being mekadesh b'malveh. Can a woman get married through money that has been loaned to her? Let's say that a woman came over to me and said, Phil, I'd like to borrow $100. No problem. In kesef talve es ami, happy to help. And I give this woman $100. A week later, I decide, you know what? Edel medel. I want to be married with the $100 that I loaned to you. I'm not giving you new dollars. I want to marry you with the money that I already gave you. Does that work in regards to Kiddushin? Says the Gemara, first of the long lines, 2/3 of the way down on Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. No, it does not. Amar Rav, hamekadesh b'malve eina mekudeshes. Why? Because malve lehotza nitna. When money is given as a halva, when I lent this person, this woman, $100, that money is not meant for her to keep. Why do people borrow money? To pay off debt, to spend, to buy, expended, whatever it is. But it's not to sit in her bank account. When I give a woman money to marry her, she can do whatever she wants with that money. But a malva is not made to sit in the bank. The halva is made to be spent. And Rav says, therefore, it's an invalid form of Kiddushin. And therefore, if I say to a woman, this money I lent you last week, the $100, can you marry me based on this? The answer, says Rav, is no. The Gemara suggests, well, perhaps Nema Kitanai. Maybe we should actually say that Rav isn't the only opinion in the sandbox. Maybe there's more stuff going on. Why? Because we have a brisa. Hamekadesh b'malve eina mekudeshes. That sounds just like Rav. V'yesh omrim mekudeshes. However, there's a yesh omrim, another opinion, a nameless opinion, we don't know who it is, who says that if I propose to this woman with $100 I lent her a week ago, she is mekudeshes. And my lab b'hakamiflagi, perhaps we could say that in this brisa, there's a machlokes about the reason why it might or might not work. Demar Savar, Rav would be the Amora that followed this shita. Demar Savar, Malvelehotza Nitna, that Mar was of the opinion that the reason why you can't get married is because the halva is meant to be spent. Umar Savar, no, Malvelehotza Nitna. Maybe she just wants the money as a nest egg, just to sit so she knows she has money in the bank and she doesn't plan on spending it. And therefore the Kiddushin should be perfectly valid. Says the Gemara, V'tizbara, is it logical to say that? You cannot say that, and we'll soon see what we can't say. You cannot say what we just suggested. Why not? Because Ema Seifa, we have a brisa. This brisa is it's not located over here. We're seeing it out of context. Vishavim, the brisa that we just learned 2 lines ago, has a conclusion to it. Vishavim b'mecher shezeh. If I want to make a regular purchase, then the money I lent works. Here's an example. I lent a woman $100. I'm not allowed to propose to her with that. However, if I tell her I'd like to buy one of your properties, let's use the $100 loan I gave you to lower my total cost. So let's say the property I'm buying is $10,000. I lent you $100, 10,000 minus 100. Now I only owe you $9,900. All is well and good. And iamris malve lehotza nitna. If you want to say malve lehotza nitna b'ma'ikani, how could it work by a mecher? If you're arguing that the reason why hotzas b'malve, that if you reason why, that hamakadosh b'malve does not work is because malve is lahotza nitna, then it shouldn't work for a mecher either. So Amar Rav Nachman, great question. Amar Rav Nachman, he says, Huna chavrin mukim la b'mili ochri. Huna and his friends have learned this in a different way. What are we dealing with over here? With this machlokes tanoim, where we seem to have one shita that says hamakadosh b'malve eina mekudeshes, and v'yesh omer mekudeshes. What's that case? Says the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom on Mem Zayin Amar Aleph. We're talking about a case going to Amar leis kachili b'mana. A man says harad mekudeshesli with this $100 bill. V'nimtza mana chaser dinar. He gave her a stack of $100 bills of $1 bills totaling 100. But he made a mistake in counting. That's why we have those counting machines in the bank. Mistake, there's only $99. So there's a problem. I told you, Harat Mekudeshes B'manazu, which has a unit of 100, but it's only 99 singles. So says the Gemara, Mar Savar Ksifala Milsa Lemispe. She's embarrassed. She counts the money. Turns out it's only $99. Oh, she's going to go back. By the way, my brand new husband, you left out $1. It's embarrassing, and therefore they're not going to be mekudeshes because her emotional state is one in which she would not be willing to ask for that next dollar. Umar Savar, no. She would not be embarrassed, and therefore they would be married. And maybe, perhaps that's the machlokes. It's not about whether or not we say milvelo tzanditna or not, but rather whether or not she's embarrassed to ask for that other dollar. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. We have another similar case scenario where everybody thinks she's not embarrassed. What's that case? Rabbi Elazar taught us the following case. He's kachili b'mana v'nasan ladinar. Let's say a man says, I want to marry you. I'm going to marry you with 100 mana, but today I'm only giving you one of the $100. Harez mekudeshes v'yashlim. They're married. He just owes her $99. No problem at all. So says the Gemara, perhaps lema we can say, lema kitanoi amar l'shmaitze. Why don't we have the same machlokes over here about whether or not she's ksifa, if she's embarrassed to ask for the rest of the money? The Gemara says, that's a terrible argument. One case is where I said I'm giving her 100 by accident, I gave her 99. One case is where I said I'm giving her 100 and I gave her 1. Amre, mana chaser dinar, ksifa la milsa mispe. When all you're missing is $1, you look a little ridiculous asking for the $1. I can see why that's embarrassing. We've all had these things happen in our life where someone's like, here's the money, and they gave you the wrong amount of money. Funny story, someone wrote me a check as a mole. They're like, I wanted to give you the number of dollars as there are mitzvos in the Torah. Here's a check for $630. Givaldik. I'm like, you're Nam Haaretz, first of all. And second of all, do I have to return the $17, whatever it was? His whole mindset, he gave it to me, he gave it to me willingly, but it was a toes because he thinks there's 630 mitzvos in Chumash. So here, this is even, we understand people give the wrong amounts of money. Sometimes it's uncomfortable to go back and ask for the right amount of money. However, mana chaser tishim v'teisha, forget that. You gave me $1, Pashut, you owe me $99. It wasn't a mistake. You did it on purpose. Lo ksifa la milsa l'misbei, no question about it at all. And therefore, no comparison between the two cases. Let's continue. 4 lines from the bottom. Meisve, we have a kasha. Ha'omer li'isha. If a man says to a woman, let's say that I have entrusted an item into a woman's possession. I'm going out of town. I leave my car there. And I say, please, if you don't mind, I'd like you to hold my car as a pikadon. My product, not hers. but she's holding it. So she has an aspect of achrayas. We'll speak about achrayas more today. And then v'holcha, when she goes back into the garage, I said, I want to get married based on the car you're holding. She goes into the garage, umatzaso sheganavo she'avad. Car is gone. Im nishtayr heimena shava pruta mekudeshes. If when the guy stole the car, he left over the mirror that got knocked off when he was pulling the car out of the garage, then guess what? We're married on that pikadon because it's worth more than a shava pruta. The imlav ena mekudeshes, and if there isn't a shava pruta left over, then they are not mekudeshes, not at all. And then the brisa continues. Ubemalve, which is already back to our world, because we're talking about being mekadesh b'malve. If we're talking about a loan, so I gave her $100. That was the case we started with today. If I gave her a loan, even if she spent all the money, the brisa says she's married. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishum Rab Meir Malve, turning to the top of Mem Zayin Amabez Harei Kipikadon. Now they have a machlokas about a malva being similar to a pikadon, but one thing that's clear between both shitas is that they're married. Says the Gemara, Ad kan lo pligi ela demar savar malve afal gav deloni shtar men shava pruta. One of them says that by a malve they're only married if there remains a shava pruta. Mar savar nishtar him shava pruta in ve'ilo nishtar him shava pruta lo. So there's a machlokas, Reb Shimon ben Elazar and the Tanakama, about whether or not there has to be something left over from the halva. But everyone agrees, aval dekule alma mekadesh b'malva mekudeshes. This brisa is a huge thorn in the side of Rav. Rav started this section of the Gemara today by saying mekadesh b'malve eina mekudeshes. But this brisa, according to both Tanoim, they're married by a malve. So that's a big kasha. That's a big kasha on Rav. The Gemara says 6 lines down on Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, don't worry. Rava says, what's the lay? What does it say? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Because who's talking here? Nothing. It's just a mitzvah. There was no direct conversation here. Rava is responding on behalf of Rav. Rava was a 4th century Amora. Rav was the earliest of the Amoraim from the Dor HaMa'avar. He was Rebbe's Talmud. So they were probably not even alive at the same time, most likely. Or if they were, Rav was an extremely old man when Rava was born, because they had about, I'm just guessing, 80 to 100 years between them. So Rava is now answering on behalf of Rav. Omar Rava. Rava says, don't worry. Rav is fine. V'tizbara hamitarasta. Are you comfortable with this answer that the Gemara gave? Hamishabeshtahi. This brisa is broken in the first place. The brisa that we are analyzing, the one on the bottom of the page where there's a machlokes Tanakama and Reb Shimon ben Elazar, the one that we used as the kasha against Rav, which is that this brisa shows that the kule alma, mekadesh b'malvesh, that she's mekudeshes. This brisa, says Rava, is mishabeshta. The brisa is broken. Why is the brisa broken? The Gemara says 7 lines down, hai pikadon hechidami. In that machlokes between the Tanakam and Reb Shimon ben Elazar, what was the story with that pikadon? If she had accepted achrayas on that item, hainu malva, then it's no different than a halva. If I give you a pikadon to watch and you accept achrayas, it's the same thing as me loaning it to you in halacha. A pikadon with achrayas is equivalent to a halva. And either lo kabilale achrayas, and if she's watching my car with 0 achrayas, then we don't understand the seifa. Adatani seifa, then what it says later in the brisa is going to be hard to understand. What did we say? Uvemalve afal pishaloni shtayar heimena shava pruta mekudeshes. If by malve we say that even though there's nothing left, this is the sheet of the Tanakama, that even though there's nothing left to look at, she spent the whole halva, she's mekudeshes, then this brisa should have said that distinction. Niflog v'nisne bedida. Bamed varam amurim. What are we talking about in regards to the pikadon shelo kibla leachrayis? Aval kibla leachrayis. But if she did accept the achrayis on the pikadon, then afal gav deloni shtar men shava pruta mekudeshes. That's what it should have said. So our brisa is mishubeshta. The brisa is broken in the first place. You can't ask a kasha on Rav from a brisa that's mishubeshes. It's not that the content isn't there. It's that something is wrong with the flow of the Mishnah. It should have had a case of a niflog v'nisni bidida. So therefore, we need to explain our Mishnah, the brisa, on the bottom of Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. The one that's a kasha on Rav, we need to understand that brisa differently. We actually have to change the language of our Mishnah altogether. We had initially said the following: it said mikudeshes. We need to change it to Eina mikudeshes, which is exactly like Rav. That's how we correct our Mishnah. This brisa, and once we correct our brisa to say Eina mikudeshes instead of mikudeshes, then the din is that they are not married, just like Rav said. And Rav Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishum Rav Meir Mal veHarei Kibikodim. But my kimiflage, what are they arguing about? This new version, the Tana Kama who says that they're Eina mikudeshes, and Rav Shimon ben Elazar who says that a malva is like a pikadon. What are they arguing about? Amar Rabba says, and Rabba's not going to agree with what he's heard from people. Ashkachtinu l'Rabbanan. The Bei Rab, the Yasser the Kamri, said, I heard people talking in the base medrash. Sometimes we hear people talking in the base medrash. I'm sure you've noticed this before, where there's a chavrusa talking, and they couldn't possibly have translated the words more incorrectly. This happens all the time, and you just don't say anything. Let them learn, let them break their teeth over it, and figure it out. So Rab is sitting there listening to everybody talk, although they're on a much higher level than we are. Perhaps the Tana Kama and Reb Shimon ben Elazar are arguing about a loan that's in the Rishus Bailim as it's being returned, or if there's an ones. Let's say you're about to return an item, and then there's an ones, a tornado comes and sweeps away that which you're trying to return. It's in the possession of the borrower, and therefore I am achroi, until I return my thing properly to the hands of the balabais. I'm achroi, even with an ones. Umar savar no malva berishus bailim v'kaimahu. Malva b'rishus bailim kaima v'hu adin la'onsin. No, it's in the rishus of the malva, and therefore I, as the borrower, am off the hook. Perhaps that's what the Tanakam and Reb Shimon ben Elazar are arguing about in this new interpretation of the brisa. The Amina lahu, Rabbah said back to this group in the room, "What are you people talking about? Kule alma lo pligi de b'rishus lo v'kaimi." Pashut that the borrower is achroi until it gets back to the possession of the owner. That's for sure. My taima. What's the reason why we should say that? Because, and this is a lamdisha explanation of the Gemara, why is it that Rabbah says that as I return an item, I'm for sure achroi, even for ones, lo gara mishe'ela. If I am a borrower and I am returning that which I borrowed, I'm no less than a shoel, and a shoel has full achrayis. Just like a borrower is obligated to return an item in its proper form, and if I don't return it in its proper form, I'm fully achroi. I'm guilty until innocent. I own that item while I'm using it. You asked, I borrowed an axe from you. If I don't return the axe, I owe you an axe. That's me. Pasha did that. The same Rabbah says back to them. The same will be true here. Malve lo kolshakin, all the more so by a malve. I'm borrowing money from you. I have to return the money. The wind blew away the cash. That's my problem, not yours. I still owe you the money. Ella, rather, Rabbah says what's going on is like this. Hacha malve b'rishus bailam lechazara ikabeinayu. The only difference between them is only in regards to whether or not the malve is b'rishus bailam in regards to the actual chazar itself, not about ones. Asks the Gemara, wait 1 second. 2/3 of the way down on Mem Zayin Amal. Velahad Amar Rav Huna Hashol Kardo Mechavero. Wait 1 second. Rav Huna taught us the following: if I borrow an axe from you, or a hoe, or some type of gardening tool, Bika bo kina'o. Once I use that tool, I take the shovel and I stick it in the ground to move some dirt around. That's when I make a kinyan as a shoel. Lo bika bo. If I don't use it, if I don't dig into the ground, lo kina'o. So perhaps we should say, Lema kitanoi amra l'shmaitze. Perhaps we should say that there's a machlokes tanoim about this as well. And Rashi jumps in over here. Rashi's 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more. Dibur maskal Lema kitanoi amra. Did the Reb Meir, that according to Reb Meir, within our brisa above, he would say im bikabo kinao lo bikabo lo kinao. That perhaps we should say that the Chachamim would say, even without using the tool, you've already made a kinyan. Says the Gemara, lo. That comparison is not a good comparison. You can't bring me the case of Rav Huna, where by Shoel we have to use it. You can't say that that's what the Machlokes of Meir and the Chachamim is. Why not? Because, says the Gemara, Ad kan lo pligi el b'malva de lo hadra be'ena. We're talking about a malva that doesn't need to be returned exactly as is. What does that mean? If I borrow $100 from you, I don't need to give you the same $100 bill back. I can give you back 520s. It's the same thing. Aval b'she'ela. But when we're talking about borrowing an item, that item needs to be given back as is. Aval b'she'ela dehadra be'ena divrei hakol bika bo in lo bika bo lo keno. We could not possibly have a machlokas about that because there's a difference between malveh lending money and shoel. In regards to malveh, I don't have to give back the serial bill, the same exact one. I can give back any breakdown of money, no problem. But when it comes to a loan, I have to give back the exact, when it comes to borrowing, I have to give back the exact item. Says the Gemara, perhaps nema hiskachi, nema kitanai. Maybe we can say that this machlokas that we've been discussing is just like the following machlokas. Hiskachi li b'shtar chov. Let's say that I have a shtar chov between me and Yaakov. Yaakov owes me money. Hare'at, you, my wife-to-be, will be married to me with the shtar that Yaakov owes me money. So if she takes that shtar, then she can collect the money that Yaakov owes me. Maybe that marriage would work. Or I had a halva. Yaakov borrowed money. It wasn't a transaction of mecher, but it was a halva in such a case. And v'hir shaleh, I told her she now has the rights to collect. So says the Gemara, maybe we should say over here that this machlokas connects to ours. Rav Meir Omer Mikudeshes. Rav Meir says this is sufficient in order to get married. The Chachamim Omer Meina Mikudeshes. They say no, it's not sufficient. So the Gemara asks on this brisa, what kind of shtar chov is this? I had given a case where Yaakov and I have a shtar chov between us, and Yaakov owes me money. Hi shtar chov hechidami. Ilema shtar chov de acherem. If we're talking about an external shtar chov between me and Yaakov, hainu malve biyat acherem. If Yaakov owes me money based on a shtar, that's no different than Yaakov owing me money based on a halva. It's the same exact thing. Hainu malve biyat acherem. Elalav, it must be that the contract is not between me and Yaakov, but rather, Elalav, shtar chov dida. She owes me money. The wife-to-be. There is no Yaakov in the picture. I say, Hare'at mikudeshes li, with the bittul of the shtar that you owe me money. And that's what we're talking about. Perhaps there's a machlokas here as well, challenging for Rav, because Rav says, Eina mikudeshes. Says the Gemara, no dice. Le'olam, really, it's not that way. It's really shtar chov de'acherim. Really, we're talking about a shtar between me and Yaakov. Here we're talking about two things. We're talking about malveh b'shtar, loaning with a shtar, which is different than what Rav was talking about. Rav was talking about stam halva. Here we're talking about a shtar that's being used for a halva, or a milveh al peh, or a verbal halva. Let's go through both of these. We're going to be stopping about 10 lines down on Mem Ches Med Aleph. Says the Gemara, B'milveh b'shtar b'mai pligi. What's the case of milveh b'shtar? Perhaps, says the Gemara, that it's plugta de Rebbe v'Rabbanon kemiflage. That they're talking about a separate machlokes, this Rav Meir Chachamim, about mikudeshes and eina mikudeshes, where the case was hiskachi the b'shtar chov. That is connected to the following machlokes to Tanya, 8 lines from the bottom. Osios niknos b'mesira diri Rebbe. Rebbe says you can just hand over the letter. If Yaakov has a shtar between me and him, he can give the letter to the wife-to-be, or I can give the letter to the wife-to-be and say, that Yaakov owes me money. No. We have to have a direct, explicit in the shtar. The shtar is now being given over from Yaakov to the wife-to-be. It has to be very formal. Mar isle de Rebbe. And the sheet of Reb Meir that says she's mikudeshes holds of Rebbe, the more lenient opinion. Umar lesle de Rebbe. And one of them holds not like Rebbe. One of them holds like the Chachamim. Perhaps this machlokas of Meir and the Chachamim in the case of Iskachi li b'shtar chov is actually talking about something else. Maybe everyone agrees to the Chachamim that we need a very explicit form of communication, that the shtar between Yaakov and me is now formally given over to the wife. We're arguing about something else. What's Rav Papa talking about? We need Rav Papa had an extra layer on top of the Chachamim, which is that we need the specific language of kani lahu v'chol shibudeha. That not only is Yaakov giving over the star that he had towards me, he's giving over to the wife, but we add there that it's also with all the shibudim that Yaakov would have had to Yaakov's properties. And Mar Isle de Rav Papa, Umar, less like the Rav Papa. Rav Meir was of the opinion that he doesn't hold the Rav Papa, so they're Mikudeshes. And the Chachamim hold the Rav Papa, so therefore they're not Mikudeshes. Or another possibility, maybe everyone agrees like to the Chachamim and to Rav Papa. We need both sets of explicit language, not just the basics that the document is there, but to add in the shibudim of Yaakov as well. We're arguing about something else. What's that? Last two words on Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, turning to the top of Mem Ches Amud Aleph, Amar Shmuel. Let's say that I sell a shtar chov to a friend, and then I'm mochel the shtar chov. Wow, that's not good. Let's say that Yaakov and I have a deal together. Yaakov has a shtar that he owes me $1,000, and I propose with that. And then I say to Yaakov, machol. I say to that shtar, machol. Nothing, don't worry about it. The shtar is unnecessary now. So then halacha is machol. Even the Yorshim can't collect on that. So Damar Islay de Shmuel, according to the Chachamim, he holds of Shmuel, he's concerned about the fact that there could be a mechila on the shtar, and therefore when she takes the shtar, she's not married because the shtar is machul. There's no financial value to it anymore. Umar Leslay de Shmuel, and according to Rav Meir, they're actually married because we're not concerned about mechila. And and perhaps we're not even worried about that. Perhaps the Kulei Alma Islay de Shmuel. Maybe everybody holds like Shmuel that we are concerned about the mechila, and therefore she should not be married. But we're not even talking about that. We're talking about her perspective. Mar savar isha samchadaita, a woman trusts a man. Meimar amra lo shavikli lididiu machali achrini. You're right. Maybe this star won't be binding, but he'll give me something in its place if there's a mechila on the star. Umar savar isha nami lo samchadaita. And maybe the other shita holds that a woman doesn't trust the man, therefore they're ain't a mikudesha. So we have 5-6 explanations about how to understand the machlokas of Meir and the Chachamim. And the last part that we were discussing for the day is b'malve al peh b'may pligi. What is the discussion of malve al peh? Says the Gemara, that is bid Rav Huna Amar Rav. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav. You might remember we learned about this manuli biyodcha tenehu leploni, a case of b'ma'amad shlashtan kana. So if I'm standing with Yaakov and my wife to be, and the money that Yaakov owes me, we give directly to her. That's the case of malve al peh. They're married. Mar savar ki ka'amar Rav hani mili bepikadon aval b'mal velo. According to the Chachamim, where they say she's eina mikudeshes, the only time Maimed Shlashtan works is with a pikadon, but not with a halva. That's Rav Meir. That's the Chachamim. But Umar Savar, Rav Meir's of the opinion, Loshna Malva Veloshna Pikadon. We can use Maimed Shlashtan to get married. So we're going to stop right here. We'll pick up in Mir Hashem tomorrow, 45 minutes before Mincha, from the words Nema Kitanoi, about 10 lines down on Mem Ches Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful Shabbos and a beautiful Chag Sameach.